SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Women's sports is experiencing new heights in the worlds of football and basketball. With UEFA bringing Two Circles on board to find new sponsorship and revenue opportunities, the WNBA is expected to earn up to $2.2 billion in its next broadcast rights deal. I'm your host, Callum Williams, and on this episode of iGaming Daily, the rest of the Insider Sport team will look into how European and US betting operators can look to grow and find new sponsorship opportunities in both sports, and what this means for the future growth of women's football and basketball. But first, a word from our sponsor, Optimove. Optimove is the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 56% of the EGR Power 50 personalised player experiences with Optimove. To get a free demo, go to www.optimove.com/SBC, and we'll also leave the links in the description for this episode below. Firstly, Ted, Kieran, nice to speak to you again on the pod. How's your weekend just been?
Yeah, not bad, thanks, mate. I've obviously just come back off a short holiday up to the Yorkshire Dales, which was quite nice to get out of the city for a bit. Nice. I'm sure you've both missed me immensely while I've been gone.
Was crying for to come back. No, only joking. Yeah, it's been all right, hasn't it, Kieran? How's your weekend been?
It's been good. I went to a local festival on Saturday, so that was interesting.
Nice. Some
interesting bands. It was free, so you can imagine the quality, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Can't go wrong there. Yeah, well, the Insider Sport, we reported that UEFA's brought on the Two Circles, the kind of sponsorship specialists, to kind of head up their commercial programme between 2025 and 2030. 2030, I should say.
I think that's right,
yeah. So the programme will include Two Circles heading up marketing rights and other sponsorship avenues for tournaments such as the Women's Euro, the Women's European Championships, the Women's Champions League, and the Futsal Championships and other type of championships. So, Ted, I'll come to you first. What can we expect from UEFA's partnership with Two Circles, and what sponsorship activity do you think this duo will pursue?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously in the context of us discussing sort of betting side of things, as we usually do on this podcast, probably not much to do with that area, I'd imagine, partly due to the context of football in general looking to tone down, I guess, for want of a better term, some of the betting sponsorship side of things. We've seen a lot of that discussion in the men's side, so we can imagine that will sort of transfer over to the women's. I think something that I'll let Kieran speak a bit more about this because I know he's done some interviews and written some stuff about this in the past. Obviously, it'd make a lot of sense for these for the women's football organisers and the tournaments to partner with brands that focus more on sort of female consumers and products and brands that sort of resonate more with this demographic. So, I mean, do you want to take over from that, Kieran? I know you've written some stuff about this.
Yeah, so I'll take it back to an interview I did, I want to say last Feb. Well, not last Feb, this Feb. It feels like a year ago, actually, but it's not. That was with Queenie Porter, who is the managing director of Wow Hydrate, and she is also the vice president of the West Ham Women's. And that was when she first got that role, and she talked to me about how women's football sort of has the opportunity to choose their sponsorships and pick ones that suit them. They don't have to follow what the men's game's doing. And she talked a lot about the different sponsorships that they can attract. A lot of them being travel related, maybe sort of self-care related and health, to do with makeup and stuff like that. And also things like more family-related sponsorships, so things like Alton Towers or theme parks and stuff like that. So I think that's quite interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember I remember reading that article that you did, Kieran, which was really good. Just talking about the demographic, you've got to cater to that demographic quite heavily, really, haven't you? Because as the women game's growing in football, you've just got to kind of accommodate your growing female-orientated fan base, haven't you? But Ted, how valuable will women's football be from a marketing perspective for certain operators? I know betting operators haven't, there's not a lot of coverage, really, is there, for betting operators within the women's game? In fact, none at all. We can compare it to the men's game. So has it been undervalued? And this isn't just for betting operators, it could be for operators across multiple industries.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's important to build off what Kieran's just mentioned with sort of targeting of different consumer demographics and finding the right brand partners. Obviously, for the most part, I hope I'm not being stereotypical here, but I think we can all agree that betting is, by and large, more of like a male activity, really, for the most part. If you go into your average betting shop, the customer base will be overwhelmingly male. I'd imagine the demographics are similar for online as well. So as a result, it's kind of not surprising that operators would target more the men's side of the game, which will have, understandably, the more overwhelming male audience. Whilst the women's game will not. Also, I don't know if this is something we've noticed, but women's football, I think, is often branded as and comes across as a bit more like a family orientated sort of game, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Whilst men's football is often, again, to sort of go with stereotypes, it's, like lads sort of thing, you know what I mean? So it's gonna have that connection more with betting, I guess. This isn't to say I think it's not been entirely ignored. I mean, Kieran, you noted earlier in a conversation there is a club that has got a more broad partnership, isn't there?
Yeah, we were looking, obviously, before the podcast, just trying to do some research, and we noticed that Burnley in the WSL, they are partnered with 96.com, which is the same as the men's team. So they're actually going to be sort of wearing that sponsorship on the front of their kits. But weirdly enough, they've also done a different partnership with Dude Perfect, the YouTube channel. And they are the sponsors for the junior, infant and like child kits. So it's interesting to sort of see how maybe there's scope for the women's team to maybe, I don't know, sort of change the front of shirt sponsorship in the future. But I think that sort of brings it on to the fact that a lot of at the minute, the women's game it's growing immensely, especially the WSL. But a lot of these women's teams and men's teams are only just starting to separate. So for a long time, the women's team sort of piggybacked off the men's team in sponsorships and agreements, and they had the same departments. Well, now you're actually seeing a lot of WSL teams create their own women's sort of departments and sort of structure to generate these sponsorship and partner agreements that are catered for the women's game and people who go watching the women's football week in, week out.
Yeah, I think it's quite a positive thing to see, really, isn't it? Like you say, but a while ago, not even that long ago, sort of women's football with a lot of these major clubs would have been seen as kind of an add-on almost. Yeah. Like, I don't want to use, we shouldn't really use the term like side thought or anything like that, but I think in the eyes of a lot of people, it probably was seen like it was. Now, with the value of the sport rising, rising year on year, we're seeing attendances go up as well, aren't we? Like Arsenal are traditionally one of the biggest sort of teams in women's football, and they're going to be hosting more games at the Emirates, aren't they? Whilst usually their games are, I think it's at Boreham Wood Stadium, which is obviously a much smaller ground. But they're recognising that a lot more people are going to these games and it's getting a lot more interest, so they're going to host a few more of them at the Emirates, which is obviously like a 60,000 seater stadium, so it's pretty big for the sport. And as a consequence of that, we're seeing the women's teams take on more prominence and become much bigger organisations, and with that, sort of forging their own way in partnerships and strategy. I can't imagine that betting sponsorships will take. We are seeing it, as you've said, Kieran. There's a couple of it. There's some sort of small examples. I can't imagine that they'll pursue it that much, just purely because of like what we've discussed about demographic targeting. But it will be there. I think the main thing around it is probably going to be about sort of marketing and advertising and social media rather than like actual kit sponsorships. Personally,
yeah, and definitely agree with what you said there, Ted. I mean, we've touched on the WSL there, and they're bringing in record revenues. I mean, the 2022-23 season brought in record revenues at around 48 million. That is what we've covered on Insider Sport. That's a 50% increase from the season prior, the 21-22 season. So you can just see the indicativeness of how the league's growing. But moving on to next year, we know we've got the Women's European Championships. And this is obviously going to be another opportunity for maybe bookmakers or maybe other operators, like we said, outside the gambling and gaming industry. This is a real opportunity as well for sponsorship and marketing and visibility exposure from this tournament as well, because we know the last European Championship, obviously, England won, so we're looking to retain that title, aren't we? But so what can we just expect from the next European Championships in terms of how bookmakers and other companies can just broaden their horizons through the women's game? I'll go to you with this one, Kieran. Yeah,
so obviously we've mentioned, like, when you talk about the WSL and these domestic leagues, you're thinking about the fans or the people who go week in, week out, but when you talk about these big tournaments like the women's Euros, and as you said, in 2022 England won, and it at the time became the most watched women's tournament to date. I think it had a viewership of about 347 million, so quite impressive. But a lot of that is down to these tournaments. They do generate a different demographic altogether from the week in, week out games. So you've got a lot of male viewers who will be interested in betting on the sports. I think that does open up a lot of opportunities for operators to sort of take advantage of the different demographics of these games compared to normal. So you probably will see a lot more marketing opportunities and a lot more initiatives from betting operators to sort of cater to the men who are watching at the time.
I'd just like to add on that, I think quite an interesting one to put in here is like national pride. I think that's often a big thing we see around these tournaments, isn't it? And I wouldn't be surprised if we see operators bring in some more marketing around that of just supporting the Lionesses in England, for example, and people in general, regardless of whether they follow a sport or not, you want to see your national team do well in any circumstance. I think operators will be capitalising quite heavily on that. We saw a lot of that during the last Euros anyway, because I think the Lionesses really, a fantastic performance during that was a massive asset to companies. I think, we're in Manchester at the moment. I'm pretty sure Paddy Power had some marketing, didn't they, around the Man City stadium and training ground where some of the matches were taking place.
Yeah, I think so.
So I think we can expect to see a repeat of that, and also partly because of what Kieran pointed out, it's going to be a much broader audience than the WSL tends to get on the Saturday matches.
Yeah, well, I don't think Two Circles involvement will take place during the Women's Euros next year, but it will for the next edition in 2029. So they're going to be very busy as well, finding sponsorship opportunities for the UEFA Women's Champions League, which continues to grow as well. So that's all for part one. But in part two, we'll be heading across to the Atlantic to speak on why the WNBA is experiencing a new growth phase and what this means for US betting operators.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
And we are back, and we are just gonna briefly touch on the rise of women's basketball in the US and the WNBA in particular. I don't know how much used to your knowledge is on the women's basketball, but as an NBA fan, I've not been able to escape the fanfare around it. Just so briefly, the league has reportedly agreed a $2.2 billion deal, which is a part of the NBA's recent 11-year, $76 billion broadcast deal with ESPN, NBC, and Amazon. So this would be triple the amount of the WNBA's last TV deal, and this has largely come from the incoming rookie draft class of Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, etc. And this is stemmed from their rivalry from the college game of the past 2 seasons, and so there's now this new wave of exciting young female basketball players. So I'll go to you, Ted. How big of a deal is the NBA? The WNBA, should I say, in the US, and how valuable is it for connecting with as a broad section of fans as possible?
So, first I would say WNBA is a really huge deal in the US, obviously in the same way that women's football is over here. I think they're the two counterparts, really, aren't they? In Europe, women's football, football in general is obviously the biggest sport over here. As a result of that, women's football is by far the biggest women's sport. In the US, they obviously it's a very multi-sport country. They've got basketball. They've also got soccer. They've got, the American football and so on. They've got baseball. Women's basketball is by far the market leader, isn't it? I think in terms of women's sports, followed by
You'd probably
soccer.
say something like women's MMA as well. You'd probably say so,
that's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's a sport that's really been defined by a lot of high-profile athletes, hasn't it? Who've branched into other areas of media as well. But I think overall, the WNBA is the leader. I think out of some of them, I believe it's out of the 5 most searched, like Google searched women's franchises in the US. I believe 3 of them are WNBA franchises. Yeah. So that really shows how much how much of a connection it has with a lot of fans. There's also a lot of female participants in basketball just from the grassroots level upwards. So I think that has driven it quite a bit. So obviously if we're going to sort of link that in with betting operators, it's a chance for them to sort of bridge the demographic divide, I guess, and connect with a lot of different female fans who in the US might be a bit more open to betting on sports than women traditionally have been in Europe. Yeah,
speaking on betting sponsorships, Kieran, I know that the WNBA have actually been quite active in betting sponsorships with the likes of DraftKings and FanDuel. Can you just speak on those sponsorship agreements with the league and who's partnered with who, and why is this so significant for the league's future growth?
Yes, the most recent one, obviously we've covered at Insider Sport, is the WNBA with DraftKings, who is the second largest sports book in the US, sort of based in Boston. And as you mentioned, they sort of sit behind FanDuel in that sort of nation league table. Yeah. It's absolutely huge. I think in the piece that I think you wrote, Callum, I think you covered it, or was it Ted actually? I think Ted covered it.
Yeah, I think that was one of mine.
Yeah,
I'll take credit for
it. Sort of DraftKings kept sort of emphasising how the growth of the league and the fact that it's just massive exposure from, like we said about the football, from a wide range of demographics, and it sort of brings them all together. I mean, the betting side in the gambling sector in America is quite new compared to England. So they're obviously at the minute just trying to get the brands, and they're all competing to become the best sports book or the most well known. And they've obviously seen WNBA's growth and decided this is something we want to be a part of. And it's a really, really good opportunity for them to sort of get eyes on it from a lot of different demographics. And yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, from the circles that I watch within the NBA, I do see a lot more activity from men talking about the WNBA game now, and it's coming from a genuine interest, because like I mentioned before, Caitlin Clark, she's kind of like been taking the whole country by storm, really, obviously from a days in college and a rivalry with Angel Reese in the national championship final and during March Madness. But they were breaking TV records all across March Madness last season, so it's really interesting to see how just the men viewership is growing over there. I know ESPN have reported record viewership for games this season. There's also record attendances this season in terms of average attendance. So it really does seem like the WNBA now is in a future growth phase because like I said, some of these rookies that are coming in, they've got a 10-year career ahead of them. So now it's all about how can these operators capitalise. And I'll open this to finish it out. I'll open it to the both of you. Why should the marketing value of the WNBA not be understated in the US, considering what could potentially lie ahead? I'll go to you first, Ted.
I think for exactly the reasons you've just mentioned in your background there, Callum, it's got record revenue, it's got record attendance, it's got record viewership, it's getting a lot of engagement from both male and female audiences. All of this just shows that it's going to continue growing. It's also got, as you said, a real, probably the most amount of young talent it's ever had, which is only ever going to be a positive thing for a sport. So there's a big marketing opportunity around that for operators, both partnering with the league, its teams and players, and I guess as well from their actual offering things like prop bets on players, specials around players. Like Caitlin Clark, like you said, is a really big sort of marketing and sort of betting market opportunity. So it definitely can't be understated. It's the leading women's sport for a reason.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, like Ted said, I think the biggest one for me is I covered a bit of this earlier this year, and Caitlin Clark's got her own term named after her, the Caitlin Clark effect. So I think from an operator's point of view, you've sort of got to jump on these trends, and let's hope that the WNBA continues its year-on-year sort of increase in ticket sales and the rise in viewership. But at the minute, they've sort of just got to jump on any trend they can. And the WNBA has done an absolute masterful job in marketing itself as a league and an organisation through its players. And yeah, that can't be understated how important that is for betting operators. Yeah,
definitely feels like they're copying more so the NBA model now of marketing the players and making them larger than life. That's what we see with likes of LeBron James and Steph Curry, and now it feels like the WNBA have got their own new stars for the generations to come. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this podcast today, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.